Thanks, Brian, for having me and also saying that you can't get developer docs right, because I'm definitely not have figured out how to do developer docs. But I want to present everything I learned in the last 1.5 years of being in charge of our company's developer docs and taking them from very usable or usable only by TypeScript, NPM folks, and not anyone else. So one day I'm here in the second floor in my home office. I went down to see my daughter, and my daughter is 9 years old and she's trying to learn crocheting. And crocheting is if you can do it, you forget that there are a lot of moving parts to it. Like you have a thread on the left hand, and you have to take care of it that it's not too tense. And you have this strange needle who always gets tangled with the wool, and then you have to do the right patterns. And this is actually a really hard task if you're just starting out to learn crocheting. And she was like really angry, frustrated, because she watched a YouTube video, a tutorial on how to do a simple thing like threads and a specific pattern. And I said, yeah, it's really hard what you're trying to learn here. You have a lot of moving parts and you have to be patient. And she said, yeah, the tutorial doesn't make any sense. She got stuck somewhere. There was something missing. And also someone, the person said, this is easy. So you have basically two problems here with that approach. You have a great product, like the end product you have here when you do crocheting and the finished product. But the documentation was basically wrong to how to get to use it. There were steps missing. I checked it. There were 2 steps missing that were, I think, shown, but there was a hand before on the tutorial. You couldn't make it out if you don't knew that you have to take the steps. And to enrage your customer, they said, yeah, it's easy. And just like my daughter, she got enraged because it wasn't easy for her. People always get, I always get angry when I try to test a new product and it says, yeah, this is simple, or this is easy, or this is straightforward. And I just think, no, it's not straightforward. I don't know what to do because I don't know how it works behind the scenes. So, and in this talk, I will try to solve these 2 problems or give you pointers on how to solve this problem to make your documentation better. Because I think documentation is the product. It not does only make or break your product, but it also is your product. And the second one is actually more easy to fix because you can do something like static linting for spell correction, also for specific words like easy. And you can improve your documentation with this. And it also is automatic checking, so you don't have to correct anybody, any engineer who writes documentation by yourself, but the linter does it. And if you don't trust me, that documentation is very important. I dug up some data from Slash data, and they said in the develop program benchmark in Q3 2023, and they asked, I think, 17,000 developers from 140 countries, and that came out that documentation is the single most important resource to developers. They didn't specify what documentation, so I assume it should be like video tutorials or also written documentation. But yeah, so documentation is important for everyone. So how do we go from barely usable on the right side to usable on the left side? And one example that always comes up when we're talking about docs, it's like the Stripe documentation. The Stripe documentation is perfect for its use case. You can see all these moving parts. It's actually a little bit small, but that's okay. You can see you have on the left side, you have different environments. You can play around on the right side. So for its use case, it's perfect for developers and really cool, interactive, and you get to build your stuff on the Stripe docs, your use case, and can use it afterwards. So that's a cool thing. But broaden the horizon a little bit, you can also check something like Pronovix. They have a best developer portals. This is 2022. I think now the 2023 developer portals, best developer portals award is out there. But these are from 2022. I took some examples there, and I really like the Ivan documentation because it's straightforward what you can do with it. Then they also combine the API docs with the docs here. And I think it also got on board. What I really think is cool is the platform OS documentation on the upper right, where you can see specific directions for someone coming to the documentation. You have a great search, you have a getting started. If you already know your way around, you can go direct to the API docs, and you basically know where to go to get your thing started. Nope, that's the wrong. So when I first started out, let's get back to our use case. This is what I found. So if you look at the documentation for version 0.2.7, this was September 22 of our AskUI documentation here. Basically, what you see is a starting page, and there everything got reiterated what was already on your docs, which I really disliked. On your homepage, what I really dislike, because if someone clicks on your docs, they're already interested because they think the features you have will get them there. So okay, let's go to getting started, and then we reiterate it again. So these are the first things I noticed here. I have to, yeah. So basically, you have 2 clicks, you can already lose 2 people there or more. A percentage will always say, "Oh, this is too much. I don't want to click as much." Developers are impatient, like I am also impatient. Can relate to this. But you can also notice there's no search. So if I don't know what I'm actually searching for and type something in, there's no way to actually find something when you're looking for a specific thing. There's no clear thread. So I'm here at Why Ask UI. Where do I click next? You can easily not see this here. Like, oh, how do I install it? Also, the installation guide is for every OS the same. So you have to know your way around. You have a lot of information you don't need. So yeah, okay, we install something with npm, some dependencies, and yeah, basically we don't need this when we are doing onboarding. You can do some box you can collapse. You don't need this. We'll see this later. And there's basically no guidance, and it's hard to follow. Yes, I could get it working when I started at AskUI, but yeah, I also had to do some weird npm stuff to get it working. So it was also not really working. It just worked because I knew how to use npm, basically. So these are not the ideal docs for developers, obviously. So what are the ideal developer docs? And when we think about developers, and I sometimes get called into onboarding calls, which funnily our sales department does, and the best calls are the ones with real developers. Because they're like, I want to do this, and I need from you this and this and this. And then I can say, yeah, I have all this because our documentation is now comprehensive. And I just give them GitHub repositories, and I give them the right pages in the documentation, and they find their way around. And next day they call, yeah, we got it working. Yeah, cool. So specifically, developers are searching for directions. So reiterating features on your documentation page is nonsensical to them. They already know what the features are. They want to achieve a real user goal. They have something in mind, like, oh, I want to automate a macOS desktop application or a native iOS application there. So what they actually need is, because they already have a use case in mind, they need directions on how to achieve this. So the documentation in the state I showed you, yeah, no, that's not the right thing. If they're really committed to trying it out, then yeah, they may get around to. But a lot of people will say, yeah, that's too much clicking. I don't know where to go. I will just jump away. So when you think about documentation, and I'm still getting used to how I will present this. So your product is more like a hammer to drive in the nail, so to get to the user goal. But like every tool, if you don't know how to use the tool, it's basically worthless. So if you have a hammer and you want to drive in a screw, yeah, that's not going to work. And you need instructions on how to actually use the screwdriver or your tool. It has to be useful. So I set out with any prior knowledge on how to do perfect structuring, but I started out anyway to improve this. And the first thing I wanted to do is have this homepage there. So this is the starting page. If we go to the starting page here, we removed basically the reiteration of our homepage. And I also wanted the starting page to be a little bit more specific. So we have a Gitpod configuration here because we can run it in Gitpod, our tool. That's cool. So you don't have to install anything. But still, there is something missing. Like, I want to automate Android. Why would I do a local installation when I'm on Windows? Doesn't make any sense. And there's also no explanation on why you would do that. Yeah. So works kinda, but not perfect. But we're getting there. It's better than before, I would say. Yeah. So we don't have the start page. We have a little bit of restructuring of the start page. That's cool. We didn't have a lot of tutorials, so we added some. Hope you can see it all. Yeah. A little more tutorials than before. That's cool. To get people started. These are not perfect yet, but you can already see we have tiles, so you can get your way around here. We also improved the API docs because the API docs actually they were hilarious. Like, oh, we have this click function in our SDK, and there was like, oh, does a left click, and that's all what we had at the API docs. So the next thing I did was like, okay, add an explanation what it actually does and do an example for every command we have here. So we have a command for everything. Like, okay, this is how it looks if you actually code it, and where possible and useful and where I had the time, we already included a GIF, which already also appear in the code completion if you're running an IDE or a code editor, to show what it actually does. So show, don't tell stuff. Then I come from documentation, architecture documentation, software architecture. I also wanted a terminology here. So we had a lot of specific terminology, like we have a bounding box. Somebody who's not familiar with computer vision, which is used under the hood, maybe doesn't know what a bounding box is, and we're speaking all of bounding boxes in the documentation. So that's important to get all the terminology right. And we also expanded the troubleshooting because that's important. I think troubleshooting is always important, especially if you're doing something like we do on your local machine. We install something on a local machine as service, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Maybe you don't need this if you have a SaaS offering, but we needed this. So I think the docs are more useful now, but still, as I've explained before, we don't have real directions here. But let's talk about beautiful first. And this is very opinionated. You can disagree with me here. That's perfectly fine. But I think the most beautiful docs are the useful docs. It's more like design follows function. And I have a very extreme example of this. Somebody may recognize this if they're coming from a DevOps background or infrastructure background. This is excerpt from the Nginx documentation on how to configure reverse proxy. And as you can see, this is bare bones markup. This is Markdown with bare bones Markdown. Maybe it's even the original HTML that comes out from Markdown without any styling. And I loved this documentation. It was a single pager. There was no search, but you can search with your browser with Command F or Control F. And I only used this site to configure a whole reverse proxy for a project I had 6 years ago. And it was perfect because I knew, okay, when I want to configure the error page, I search for error. Then I see, okay, this error page, it lives in this context, as you can see. And there's an example. And this is usually enough to get you started. So I think it was the most useful and beautiful documentation I ever used, in my opinion. But you may differ. If you're thinking about documentation, you always should use the approach design follows function. So you can do some cooler stuff. I have to, is this empathy? Yeah. Like the empathy platform. This is a more polished look, I would say. They have some nice gimmicks like this, where you can see, oh, this tracks the thing. And also these points here are are recurring here. So there's a great design which goes through every layer. And I really like this animation. You can see, yeah, okay, the empathy platform is built on 4 layers, and you can click on this and then it pops up and you can select a microservice layer, for example. And I think this is also animated. You can click on this. What is this? So this is really cool design where you can dig down deeper, even deeper anytime. But basically, basic design for me is beautiful if it fulfills its needs. So with that in mind, we did another iteration. We still have the starting page, but I thought, yeah, we need to provide a little more directions on, also make it more use case based design, like not tutorials or guides, which acts as more like a bin for everything. You don't know where to put it. So I said, okay, what are our users actually doing? And we restructured the menu. So we have getting started. That's okay. We also have how AskGuy works on, because that sometimes it's interesting for me. I don't know what this is here, and we have installing AskGuy still. But what are the users actually doing? They are selecting elements because we do GUI automation. Yeah, it's a little bit too much here, but you all can see we have text element selectors. So, okay, if you want to select elements, you know where to look. Also, how do you execute on automations? This is already cool because you see we have different things you can automate. Maybe you should put this at the forefront at the starting page. Should be there, but we're already structured it nicely. So we have different things you can automate. Integrations is what you would think, like continuous integration, database, and that stuff. And also the rest remains the same. So this is already more use case based, more thought out from the user side, which I like. But I wasn't satisfied with it yet. So is this useful? Yes, but the feedback from the users, we got quality feedback there from users who onboarded, were like, kinda. We still have our problems. We can't find stuff, and also our sales people who do really do the onboarding most of the time said, yeah, sometimes I can't find things I need to find. So maybe that's not too useful. What we should do, and this is, I'm not sure if this is the right term. I'm no technical writer, but I call it segmentation because we defined personas in a workshop and found out with the data we had of people who were onboarding, we talked to them, and also what our tool used to do. We had like 4 different personas. So you should do this if you're doing developer docs. If you're just marketing or doing docs for developers, you really know they are only developers, not like in our case, we have some testers who do test automation, which is different. Sometimes they don't know how to use an IDE or a code editor, or we also have people who are RPAs. They know UiPath, for example, but they're not familiar with code. They really struggle when they open Visual Studio Code, because if you open an IDE for the first time, it's more like, whoa, it's so many buttons. What do I do with all these buttons? Yeah, and you have to structure it the way these people, at best, your documentation serves all of them, but yeah, it's hard actually. So we did segmentation and said, okay, we need to do something like, yeah, you want to automate Android, you want to automate desktop, you want to automate all that different stuff. And this is where the platform S example comes again. They do this actually. So if you're just starting out, you can say, okay, get started and see what Platform S is all about. But we also have a developer guide. We also have an API reference. If you didn't know, I read a figure that most 50% of the APIs, 50% of the API usage is actually non-developers. So it's cool to have an API reference. Also have best practice use cases. So they do some kind of segmentation here to direct the users where they need to go. And that's the same from a fintech company. They do this also. So we have the Explore APIs, how to get started, and also the developer block. So when you're doing segmentation, you have to have user goals in mind. And now it becomes a little bit theoretical, but it's nice to get a theoretical basis on how to structure your docs, actually. And I enjoyed digging into it. So what are user goals? User goals are rooted in the real world. Like a lot of examples I had before, like I want to automate an Android, I want to automate a browser farm, I want to test a specific workflow. Like this is a real world user goal. And you have to define those based on your personas at best. And I have some examples here. You can read it up. There's a book. I always forget the title, but there's a very famous book. And example user goals we defined for our documentation was the user wants to automate an Android device, or the user wants to automate a native Windows application, or the user wants to automate a native macOS app. Actually, the last one we defined, but nobody ever did this yet. So it's more like Android and Windows, but that's okay. So, and then you have these user goals, and then you go to learning objectives. And learning objectives are a very interesting thing because they are intellectual goals. And intellectual goals, you will see how they fall into different categories. But basically, with an intellectual goal, you can't achieve a user goal. You have to combine more than one learning objective, 2, 3, or 4 at least, to get a user to achieve their goal. That's the thing you have to do. And I talked about categories, and there are 3 categories, and I brought 3 examples. So we have the user should be able to connect our software with their device. That's an applicable skill. Like how do you connect AskUI to an Android device? You can actually automate it. And then is the user should be able to describe the different methods used to select text. So when you do GUI automation, you can do exact matching or regex matching or contains matching. This is more like awareness because that's not applicable. Can't use it. But another example would be, oh, I have this this logger here, and I want to actually define the different log level, and I have to know what log levels are there and what do they do. That's an awareness learning objective. And then you have the comprehension objective, and you basically need all 3 of those at least to achieve a user goal. You have to know which text selection to apply to a specific scenario. That's the comprehension learning objectives. And the cool thing about learning objectives is they give you a way to modularize your documentation. So if you only think in learning objectives, a page becomes a learning objective. And a learning objective is with a single page is modular. You only have this information on one page. And if you need it on another page as a prerequisite, for example, you can say, yeah, you have to fulfill this page learning objective first. You don't say learning objective, but prerequisite is you have to know this. And that's cool because you, like in code, you don't have duplication and your documentation becomes composable. So if you want to automate Android, you have a setup. If you want to automate multiple Android devices, you basically have to do the setup and do some other stuff too. But you always have this one setup page, which is pretty cool. Makes maintenance much easier and also lets you think about what do I want to achieve with this. And we will see, I have an example there where we really confused our users by having 2 pages about Android, and they basically did the same thing but different, and also more on the one page than on the other. And we always, every week, we had questions about how do I actually set up my Android device to work with your software. And you can mitigate that by doing proper learning objectives. So to summarize this, you have user goals and you have 1 to n learning objectives the user needs to go through to actually achieve their user goal. That's how you should think about documentation. So let's switch to our last example here. So now with this in mind, we have user goals, we have defined the personas, we have defined the user goals, and we want to do some form of segmentation. So if a user comes to our page, they actually know where to click on. We did a very basic example. Don't mind the line break here. It's a very weird resolution. We have the quick start again. We have Windows, Android, macOS, Linux. And we have the enterprise checklist because a lot of people come from enterprise. And enterprises have some weird network configurations and also restricted machines where we put down everything you need to know on how to get your enterprise machine up to the task of running AskUI. Yeah. So now I know if I want to automate Android, I click on Android, or I want to automate Windows. That's the most common use case. We also have different user guides for Windows because a little bit is different all the time. So now you know where to go and to get set up. And we got a feedback, yeah, this is now much, much better. We know where to click actually. And I said, okay, we also have another problem. Yeah, we have this, where is it? Is it integration? No, it's guides. We have this problem with Android. And if you look at I think this version, can we find a tutorial on automate multiple devices? Yeah, we have automate multiple devices, which is a nice learning objective. How can I automate macOS and Android, for example? We have a part of Android here, and it says, yeah, you have to do this and this and this and this and this. And then we have the same thing, I think, on setting up Android devices. It's the same thing, more or less. It's a little bit more, but basically the same thing. And we also have web search on Android, which also talks about this. And you see, there was no clear learning objective behind these pages. And somebody might click the correct page to get their setup corrected, but most of the time they clicked the wrong page. And they were utterly confused because something was missing or different or not correct. So in the last iteration of our documentation, we have automating mobile devices and we have Android and iOS. iOS doesn't work, right? And this is only the setup. This is only setup. So we said, okay, we have the setup and then we want to do something with it. So you get set up here and then you're done. And now when you're set up, you can do something like automated web search on Android devices tutorial. And that's it. That's pretty cool. And you also have to set up Android. So we reference each other and you only have this information in one place. And you can say, yeah, you have to do this before you actually start the web search on Android, which I find pretty useful and it makes maintenance much, much easier. But it was hard to actually untangle this. So you have to watch out for this. So now that we know how to build the documentation structurally with user goals that map to learning objectives or a path of learning objectives, how beautiful of how design follows function, actually, how do we do the docs? How do we do them technically? How do we generate a static site you saw here? Yeah, we do a static site with docs as code. That's because we are very engineering heavy. Thankfully, I think we have like 15 engineers and only 20 employees, so that's great. We have a lot of engineering power, and docs as code is perfect because you only have to write Markdown, and everybody can edit Markdown in their code editor, IDE, whatever they use. So the editing is easy. That's I don't have to say any more for that. The review is easy because we can put this on GitHub. We can do pull requests. We can do some linting and all that jazz. You can export code like Markdown to every format you like. We're not in an enterprise environment, thankfully, but you can also do some styles here, like in my former company, where you need to do some CI on every document. So this is possible. You have automatic versioning in your GitHub repository, so you can bring back documentation you need. You accidentally delete it. And for me, that's very important. It's not WYSIWYG, it's WYSIWYM. I think I should correct this here, make it a cross out. Because WYSIWYG is something like Word or Google Docs, and you always have to think about formatting. And with WYSIWYM, it's more like what you see is what you mean. And this is a heading, and let the formatter take care of it and render the nice HTML. So the tech stack we use, a lot of people use this. I actually saw the V8 docs. They also use Docosaurus. It's nice. Docosaurus has some cool convenience functions. It's built on React. You can do like the automatic versioning where you can say, okay, create a new version and does the version create for you. You can build it. You can extend it easily with React and JavaScript. So that's cool. And in a former version of this tech stack, we used Alex, which is an inclusivity linter, and spell checker CLI, which is a spell checker. But recently, I think about a month ago, I changed to Whale, which is also a spell checker, but also prose linter, where you can say, I want specific phrases to not appear in our documentation. And as you already have noticed with my name and also my pronunciation and grammatical errors, I'm not a native speaker. You can ensure that your language in the docs is easy, is understandable, accessible, and doesn't include any profanity with Whale. That's all built into Whale, so that's pretty cool. Which brings me to our actual docs, which live in a GitHub repository, which is pretty cool. And let's open the structure here a bit. So when you have docs as code and you have a linter configured in package.json, so we installed some Whale here, I think, should be here. Or isn't it? No, it's not here. But you have to install it on macOS. You have to install it with Homebrew or from source. You can do a lot of interesting things. So the first thing we did was to actually outsource our styles, because I want to define the styles globally. So we put them in our own repository, and then we link them in our .github repository. So here are the styles. And some things don't make sense to put there. You also have terminology that Whale says, no, I don't accept this. But like, for example, AskUI or Okta or Jira, that Whale doesn't know that this is not a spelling error, but in German we say Eigenname. It's own company name. So you can put this here and they accept. Yeah, and the Alex rule. So what we do here, this is a, can I close this? Yes. You see, this is a symlink to a repository. And when we do linting in the pipeline, we just check out the repository with depth 1, and then we can lint with the same styles globally for every repository we have in our company, where you can force the same style guide, which is cool. Just cool. And we also have a pre-commit hook with Husky, where you can say, okay, let's make this a little bit smaller here. You can say, okay, I only want to lint, when I say git commit, I only want to lint the current version, like docs ap. That's where the current version lives, and all that terminology, and the same for the pipeline. So if you look at the workflows, we have a specific word for just for linting, which basically does the same with a specific action and says, okay, we want to lint the README and all the latest versions here. So that's how we do linting here. This is very flexible. That's why I love Docs code here. And what does Whale do? It does spell checking, and hopefully there are some arrows here in our docs. I put them there, so hopefully Whale finds it. Let's say Whale docs. That's what I do, and then you get this nice suggestion. Yeah, okay, I didn't deleted some characters here. Did you really mean explore? And also something like bigger, that is profanity. I had to ask Llama 3 why this is actually profanity, and then they explained it to me. Because profanity in German, that's easy for me, but profanity in a not native language like English is for me hard. And that's nice to have a profanity linter here. So let's go to what's next. And it says in line 6. Yeah, much more to explore. And also, it only gets bigger. Yeah, I put that there because, yeah, that's not what we actually want. And when I run docs, Whale docs again, then it actually says, okay, there are no errors. At the moment, we don't fail the build if there are errors, because I'm the only one working on the docs and usually get a PR and can fix this stuff myself. But once we roll it out, it will be easy to get the same style guide everywhere. And this is really nice. So to conclude my talk and give you some takeaways. So we wanted to tackle that the structure of your documentation is like easily followable with clear steps and clear direction. You want to fulfill the developers' user goals. Developers come, they have a user goal. They are not really interested in features, but directions. That's what I showed how to get there with user goals and learning objectives. Then design follows function. Okay, yeah, I iterated on this long enough. So when you go about structuring your documentation, you should think about the user goals first and also the personas you expect the user goals. The best thing to do is to do a brainstorming what your tool is for and also get real user data on who installs your software. Then define the learning objectives. Yeah, following the user goals in comprehensive skill, applicable skill, and awareness. And also, there's a personal opinion, use Docs as code, because Docs as code gives you all these cool tools like linting and that stuff. And you can eliminate the easy words or the simple words that may exclude some users or enrage users. And it's funny that Brian said, yeah, he's not on the on the bad side anymore. I'm also not on the bad side anymore, but on Mastodon. So if you want to connect with me, it's LinkedIn or Mastodon. And I'm open to questions now.
Sorry, hit the wrong button there. I meant to remove that. Thank you, Johannes. That was great. I think you really kind of clearly explained a process. What I liked about that was that obviously everybody's doing like different scale of docs, right? Like you can, and the things you showed could apply to like say a site with massive kind of docs, or even like a smaller site with docs. So I think all those learning objectives and things like that are things you can apply regardless of the kind of how big the doc site you're trying to create is. So for folks who are watching right now, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and I will ask Johannes before he leaves. But I had some questions. First of all, one of the things I struggle with, and maybe I want to get your take on, like, is like how one of the struggles is like there's always a bunch of edge cases and things like that that like need to be somewhere in the docs, right? But I always feel like they are distracting to like the kind of normal path. Like, okay, we've got a path that takes 70-80% of our users through, but there are an important 20% that we have to have these edge cases. And how do we accommodate them without adding in all kinds of clutter into the main path? How did you come across this kind of issue in your documentation, and how did you?
Yeah, it's an unsolved problem, more or less. Like, as I said, we do stuff on your local machine. And specifically on managed machines, there's so much things that are restricted, and you have to accommodate for everything. So what I do, if it's more lengthy to for the 20%, I do these collapsible admonitions.
Yeah,
So it's a detail box. Like if you encounter this, then read. But mostly you don't encounter it. Like setting the execution policy on PowerShell. Usually that's restricted. You can't run anything on PowerShell on a managed device. That's how enterprises work. You have to contact your IT department, and then that's where I do these callouts. But yeah, that's brittle, and I don't have a really good solution for it, actually.
yeah, yeah. I think
These
it is one of
details
those.
boxes are really cool. And also we had this problem on Mac, like we discussed before the show. Like the spaces, the virtual desktops are just weird on Mac. Like they jump around.
Uh-huh.
And that's why we created a different path for macOS, actually. So like you saw in the last example where we said, yeah, okay, you have one for Windows, you have one for Linux, and you have one for Mac. So you have specific problems for Mac a Windows user doesn't care about. So just
That makes sense.
duplicating the thing, the page.
Okay, and then what made you end up choosing like specifically Docusaurus? Because I know there's lots of Astro has Starlight. So like there's a lot of
You're a
like.
big Astro fan, I know.
Yeah, I know I'm an Astro fan, so that's why I'm asking. But I'm
I
also
didn't
like, there's
choose it.
lots of other ones. Oh, you
I
didn't
didn't
choose it.
I didn't choose it. If I had chosen it, I would have used something like ASCII-Doc.
ASCII
Um,
doc.
like Doc Toolchain, a former colleague
Okay.
from me has it. But basically, I'm not someone who discusses technology. I think I saw it, I used it, and thought, yeah, that's good enough for now.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. And the cool thing about DocuSauce, it's extensible. So you can customize it very easily. And if you know React, then you can do something like the feedback button by yourself. So it's cool. And it also has a plugin system. So it's not a bad system. And I evaluated it and it said, yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, no, I've used both DocuSource and Starlight, and they're both really good. Different. My only favoritism for like DocuSource, for Starlight is just the not having to have React for the entire docs. Like, is it necessary? I don't know. So we do have some questions from the audience, though. I want to get to them. So first, Claudia asks, do you consider effective the way that the ASP.NET Core documentation gets started part is done? Instead of segmenting by platform, from the beginning, they created a path, and inside each part of the path, we created tabs to show how the command can be done in Mac, Windows, Linux, whichever they show the command. So it's basically, instead of like doing how you did, splitting into the operating system, they would show that you have a single path, but with multiple tabs inside there showing how to do things.
Yeah, I think Selenium does this also. Like you have these different languages. What they did, they also duplicated. I checked the source code. They duplicated the pages, just changed the source code, which I think is a little bit maintenance heavy in this part. I think it depends on what you're actually trying to achieve. So we had this before where I said, okay, the installation path is different for Windows. I think we also have this in our documentation right now. So when it fits, I only want to have one page and something like this tabs, like different tabs. You have to run this command on Windows, you have to run this command on Linux and this command on macOS, because it's different if you run this in a PowerShell than on a macOS terminal, for example. Yeah, so I want to have it like this, like Claudia said. Yeah, I agree with that. But basically, we also have different installation routines for macOS and Linux and also Windows at the moment. And we want to get to one installer, but we are not there yet. So I had to just split it up because it's so different. You couldn't combine it in one page. But yes, I wanted to have it in one page because 4 pages to choose from introduces error.
Yeah. We one of the things we struggle with, I know, like I'm not on the docs team, but I know the docs team, like we have so many different languages. And that's one of, we can't, there's places where you can have overlap, and other places where you can't, or you even can't, like we have 30 SDKs, right? Like how do you,
Wow, that's
how do you, how do you put like, oh, here's the example in Ruby, in JavaScript, in Python, in Java, and like you really can't do that. So I think one of the other challenges I know they face is like what is the right choice there in terms of like getting most users to a point that they can understand the concepts, but like without overdoing having to maintain 25 different examples, right?
Yeah, but I saw the VViet docs. They have like 5 examples. I really like the VViet docs, and also the LangChain docs. I think they have these different tabs. So this is more like the common approach.
Yeah.
And I also like the tabs more because you don't have to duplicate everything. I don't know why the Selenium. I think they also use Docosaurus, but they didn't use the tabs. But they duplicated the pages, and every time you change the text on one page, you have to change it on every page. It's a huge pull request. I think it's a maintenance horror nightmare.
Yeah. Okay, so Margaret asks, as a lone person working on the docs, how do you measure the effectiveness of your docs once published?
That's a good question. We have this feedback button, which barely someone clicks. The main thing I use to gauge effectiveness is talking to our salespeople, who always talk to developers, and also get feedback from my salespeople and everybody who uses the docs internally. Because I have the luxury that Ron, my colleague, shout outs to him. He has to deal with docs in a product and talk to customers a lot. He gives me feedback and says, yeah, I don't get it. And he's the ideal customer because he's technical, but not a developer. So for us, that's perfect. Yeah, but it's hard to gauge. Yeah, and I always use every single new person who comes into the company has to go through the onboarding. and I watch them, and then I see, okay, that's the problem.
Yeah, I think I mean, the feedback buttons can be helpful. I think also, a lot of times,
Yeah,
particularly if you have customer support of some sort, like getting, you know, waiting, hopefully some of these external inputs can kind of like community, Slack or things like that, where you can give people an opportunity to like share issues they ran into. I think, but I haven't heard of anybody that has like the perfect way of gauging
yeah,
issues.
especially with developers. You
Yeah,
come as a
yeah,
developer, check it, and it doesn't work, and then you just churn.
yep.
Now in my
S-
position, I know how important feedback is. I usually give feedback or open an
Yeah.
issue on GitHub, but
Now
that's
that
not
you've
a
felt the
typical
pain.
developer.
Yeah. Okay. So, a couple more questions we've got here from Simon. Simon asks, "How do you obtain and handle feedback from developers using the docs?" I think you kind of answered that. Like, it's basically that feedback.
Yeah. We
Is
also
that
have
the
a
only
GitHub
channel?
repository, and
Okay.
you can open issues. I think we had one issue yet. We are mostly B2B. We want to be B2C, but usually we get the feedback directly from customers when they say, I couldn't get to set this up. And every time someone comes and says, I couldn't set this up, I look at the docs, and then I realize, because I was looking so long at it, and I think, yeah, okay, that's not clear. I have to improve this.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. And Simon's other question was, have you observed developers doing particular tasks to see how they work with the docs and where they get stuck? Like, do you do any user testing kind of thing?
Not yet, but that's also because our customer base is just small. But we do a thorough onboarding, and the salespeople, or sometimes I'm there and observing them, and then we usually get to the pain points where they say, "I need this resource," because the very skilled developers can usually point out where they get stuck and what they need. Yeah. But we don't have qualitative feedback or a survey like this
Sorry,
because
I technical issue here. So yeah, okay, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's really, it can be very you know those kind of tests are difficult because it's easier when you have a small, like the scope of your docs is small, but as it gets much bigger, right? Like, I think those are useful, but you also have like how many of those you're now going to have tons and tons of these. What did you call them? That, like, kind of your use cases, but like you know. Um, you're going to have so many of them. Like, okay, I can test certain things, but I'm not going to cover, if you're coming for this one particular use case,
yeah,
I can't necessarily test
you can
everything.
only do a developer experience audit for this specific use case and see if the
Yeah.
docs work. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I've worked on some smaller docs, and it was easier because it was like, okay, we're new, we don't have that much to cover. And then as you get to, like, grow in the company, the product expands, it's like it starts to become
Yeah, the Stripe docs
complicated.
are big, uh,
Yeah,
humongous,
exactly.
basically.
I know. And yet there's still always like the canonical example of like, these are great developer docs. Um,
Yeah, I've seen a few when I researched this talk. So VV8 is cool.
I know.
Yeah,
I
I
know.
like VV8 and LangChain. LangChain was also perfect, and the Nginx
Are
docs
they?
are my favorite. Yeah,
Okay.
basically,
I
I opened
I
the site where the Olama integration was, and I only opened the site and got it working. It was like cool.
that's cool. That's good to know. I actually have that lang chain on my, like, I want to check it out. Like, I haven't messed with it yet. So that's good to know that the docs are good.